Today we're going to show you how to turn this into this, the Apex Legends Wingman. Hey everybody, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Chandler.
And this is Damaged Darts, where we specialize in converting ordinary Nerf blasters into extraordinary prop blasters from popular video games and movies, and show you how you can do it too. If you like what you see in this channel, won't you be so kind as to smash that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, leave a thumbs up like, and a positive comment below. We're going to show you how to turn your Nerf Ultra 2 into the Apex Legends Wingman. So let's get started. Alright, so first off is just to get these screws out and open everything up. Alright, so now that we've got everything opened up here, now it's best at this point to take your cell phone or camera, whatever photo device you have, and get a photo of everything as it is, because we're going to need to get this thing and take out all the internals so that we can work on all the fabrication and printing on the shell. Alright, so I just basically, another thing you can do is record yourself as you're taking it apart so that you can reverse engineer it better. That's what I did. But we will go through the tutorial at the end of everything, putting it back together once you have everything fabricated. But if you've done the modification, and if you haven't done the mod with us, just click the card up here to check that out. You'll have this rev switch down here epoxied in place. So this isn't not going to move anywhere, but I can undo these contacts here to take this whole flywheel cage off. I want to get that, but I'm going to go ahead and take a Sharpie marker and mark on the rev switch and the wire where each of these wires go, just so I know next time when I'm soldering it back in where to put them. So I'm going to get a silver Sharpie marker. Actually, I'm going to only need to do it to one wire. I'll mark silver right here and silver on this wire and then take them off. Then we should be ready to go to the next part of getting these things prepped. What we've got to do next is there's a little silver screw right here we've got to take loose, because I like this about some of these Nerf guns that are in separate pieces of molding. That makes it so much easier to do fabrication projects like this, because these pop off from here, so we can sand them separately and oftentimes need to paint them different colors anyway. So we've got that loose, and you've got to be very cautious. There's these little tabs on all these kinds, and you may have seen us do the Overwatch Diva fabrication, and we had something like this where we got to push these little tabs down with a small screwdriver. Be very cautious and careful to kind of just work those through. You might be able to get a thumb in here. Any case, I'll save you the I'll spare you the long process of watching me pry these open, but I'm gonna need to push each one of these loose with a small screwdriver and just gradually pry that up. And once those come loose, it should slide off. So I'm going to go ahead and do that there. And on this one, well, let's just see. I don't think there's any tabs on this one. It just simply slides off. So that's good for us right there. So I'm going to go ahead and slide those off. Okay. And set those aside. And then I'm going to go ahead and pry these little bindings off, because what we've got to do is we've got to get to this piece right here, because this Ultra and this Ultra we're going to be doing some work with. What we're going to be doing is get my tube of JB Waterweld epoxy putty. It's a two-part epoxy putty. You just break off a piece and mush it together. I'm going to be using some rubber gloves so I don't get the stuff all over my hands. It will wash off, but it's going to take some time of scrubbing and scraping. I'm just going to use some latex gloves, mush it together, and press a whole bunch in along these letters right here. And in this lettering, that's why we're taking it apart too, to get to that piece. We're going to be mushing some of this epoxy putty in here and letting that harden overnight, because we're going to be grinding off this Ultra nice and smooth and flat, because that's a big portion, I believe, is where some of our logos and things are going to be going for this Wingman project. Actually, before I continue on pressing these, this does slide out. So I'm going to slide this one out as soon as I get this little... Set this aside. Get this little silver screw out here. So this is mainly what secures the orange portion. And it's always good to have a little I've got a big Tupperware thing here to put all of my internals in. I'm kind of setting them as I take them out, trying not to jostle them and have the screws come loose. And then I've got a little container for all the black screws. That is a very good practice to do when you're modifying stuff. And then this should go ahead and just slide off, as the other one did for me. Yep, there we go. So we got that one loose. This piece done here. Yeah, I'm gonna have to push this pin out. Yeah, it looks like it pulls out, so you can grab a little bit of pliers or a screwdriver and just pop that little hinge piece out, because we're going to be painting that separately too. Got to get everything apart as best as possible, including these little deals at the top. Put that in my Tupperware. Is there another one? I know there was another one on the right here, the bottom half here. I'll pull that one out. So now what we've got to do is get these little black pins released. A good thing I found that works better is one of these little painter spatulas. It's got a blade to it. You can even file it sharper if you need to really get in the good wedge there, and gently, because it's flexible too, you get a much gentler pry action there as you're popping this piece out. It clips in here, so I'm going to go ahead and do that next. What we've got to do next is there's a little silver screw right here we've got to take loose, because I like this about some of these Nerf guns that are in separate pieces of molding. It makes it so much easier to do fabrication projects like this, because these pop off from here, so we can sand them separately and oftentimes need to paint them different colors anyway. So we've got that loose, and you've got to be very cautious. There's these little tabs on all these kinds, and you may have seen us do the Overwatch Diva fabrication, and we had something like this where we got to push these little tabs down with a small screwdriver. Be very cautious and careful to kind of just work those through. You might be able to get a thumb in here. Any case, I'll save you the I'll spare you the long process of watching me pry these open, but I'm going to need to push each one of these loose with a small screwdriver and just gradually pry that up, and once those come loose, that should slide off. So I'm going to go ahead and do that there, and on this one, well, let's just see. I don't think there's any tabs on this one. It just simply slides off. So that's good for us right there. So I'm going to go ahead and slide those off. Okay, and set those aside. And then I'm going to go ahead and pry these little bindings off, because what we've got to do is we've got to get to this piece right here, because this Ultra and this Ultra we're going to be doing some work with. What we're going to be doing is get my tube of JB Waterweld epoxy putty. It's a two-part epoxy putty. You just break off a piece and mush it together. I'm going to be using some rubber gloves so I don't get this stuff all over my hands. It will wash off, but it's going to take some time of scrubbing and scraping. I'm just going to use some latex gloves, mush it together, and press a whole bunch in along these letters right here. And in this lettering, that's why we're taking it apart too, to get to that piece. We're going to be mushing some of this epoxy putty in here and letting that harden overnight, because we're going to be grinding off this Ultra nice and smooth and flat, because that's a big portion, I believe, is where some of our logos and things are going to be going for this Wingman project. Actually, before I continue on pressing these, this does slide out, so I'm going to slide this one out as soon as I get this little... Set this aside, get this little silver screw out here. So this is mainly what secures the orange portion. And it's always good to have a little I've got a big Tupperware thing here. Put all of my internals in. I'm kind of setting them as I take them out, trying not to jostle them and have the screws come loose. And then I've got a little container for all the black screws. That is a very good practice to do when you're modifying stuff. And then this should go ahead and just slide off, as the other one did for me. Yep, there we go. So we got that one loose. This piece done here. Yeah, I'm gonna have to push this pin out. Yeah, it looks like it pulls out, so you can grab a little bit of pliers or a screwdriver and just pop that little hinge piece out, because we're gonna be painting that separately too. Gotta get everything apart as best as possible, including these little deals at the top. Put that in my Tupperware. Is there another one? I know there was another one on the right here, the bottom half here. I'll pull that one out. So now what we got to do is get these little black pins released. A good thing I found that works better is one of these little painter spatulas. It's got a blade to it. You can even file it sharper if you need to really get in the good wedge there, and gently, because it's flexible too, you get a much gentler pry action there as you're popping this piece out. It clips in here, so I'm going to go ahead and do that next. Alright, so what I found works is you take that spatula and you wedge it in here, and be very careful just to give it a little bit of pressure away from the little wedge piece there so it doesn't snap off. I'm sure if it's fine, if it breaks on you, if you can keep a couple of them to clip in, that's okay. But just kind of wiggle it just slightly right there so it loosens it up. Then you've got enough room to kind of push down on that little wedge there and break it loose. That's what I did on this one, and it came loose fine, and it's out of the clip slot there. So just slide it into there, bend it down a little bit to pull it away from that black part, so it has a little bit of little more slack for this little wedge piece to kind of slip off the ledge that it's clipped onto, and do that on all 6 of those points. So actually, if you're able to get those 3, these other ones just kind of set in, and those will come loose. As soon as you get those 3 unwedged, it will come loose nice and easy, and you have this chromed piece out. Looks like, oh, super cool. This might aid in our process. Looks like this chromed piece actually pops out of the molding. So there's that part. If you're ever doing any kind of other modification with this, that might be a cool effect, and you could put like some other kind of underlay on the Ultra. Anyway, that comes loose. So then what we've got to do on this piece is mush this full of epoxy putty and then grind this down flat and smooth. I've got a belt sander that we're going to do that with, but if you have a hand sander or well, I would honestly not recommend doing it by hand. Get yourself a Dremel. We'll put a link in the description below where you can get one of those, or a belt sander. Those are going to be best for you to grind all this all the way down and then hand sand everything smooth. So that's what we're going to do with this side and the battery door right there. Alright, so now I'm going to take some of this JB Water Weld epoxy putty, take it out. Looks like this. You've got in the center there's a kind of a putty color and then a white color around it. One of them is the epoxy, one is the hardener. When you pinch off a bit of it and mush it together until it's an even color, then it's ready to put in and will harden in about 20 minutes or so, but it's best to leave it overnight. You can also get some some of this right here, same kind pretty much, JB plastic weld. Either will do fine, and you can get these at your local hardware store. Had this one plastic crack on me, so I've got a back up here. I got a little bit left in this package, and I'm gonna just, I'm not gonna waste your time. Hold on. Okay, got that out of here. I'm just gonna pop that in here when I'm done. So what I'm gonna need to do is we're gonna need quite a bit on the flip side and mushing it into these lines right here. Sorry about that. I've got a wonderful little poodle upstairs. Needing some outside time here. Anyhow, I'm going to take a little bit of this, break that off, and you can use your bare hands, but you'll have a lot of washing to do afterwards. So I'm going to use these latex gloves instead. Saves time, and you just mush this all together until you get everything really nice and even, and then we're just going to mush it into the back of these lettering, because we're going to be filling that in, letting it harden, and then grinding those off with our belt sander. Again, you can use a Dremel, and we will be putting a link in the description below for all of those. The belt sander that we're going to be using, and also a Dremel that you can use. Would not recommend hand sanding. Would be sanding for a very long time, and your arms and hands would be very sore, and you'd probably get like part way through it. Alright, so there it is. It's an even color. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to go ahead and start with the silver one. And we're just going to mush the epoxy in. And I'm in hopes that I'm getting it all the way to the surface of this letter here. And I'm just going to keep mushing it in. I'm going to get another bit and knead that together and keep pushing all of this epoxy in until I'm hopefully convinced that I've filled in all the crevices. And when we get to this part and we grind everything down and find that, got a little bit of a relief area that's coming through on these holes right here. But if I find that I have missed some, I can always put some epoxy on this end and sand it out. So you don't have to sit here and watch me do all this. That's what I'm going to basically do through this whole thing in the back, and then we're going to let that dry overnight and then do the sanding next. Alright, so here they are, everybody. Again, nothing pretty, but they are going to look pristine when they are hardened and we do all of our sanding. And of course this is going to be coated in that metallic silver. Same with this one right here. But I just, and again, clean hands. My hands have been a wreck using this much epoxy putty, so please use latex gloves. I would highly recommend doing that. Actually, don't use bare hands. Use latex gloves on this. Mush these this epoxy putty together. I used probably about half of this and just mushed it together and just squeezed it and just kind of like playing with Play-Doh. Just squished it into all those grooves and then put some more on it and just kept pushing and pushing and pushing until it started to kind of give way out the sides, and I knew I was getting it down all the way up in front into the lettering. So I just kept mixing blobs of it together and pressing it into the mold here, and then we're going to let this set overnight and fully harden, and then use the belt sander to grind off all this lettering. So that's what I'm looking for, is pretty much this thing as is, but no letters. We want no letters on this. I'm thinking what I'm probably gonna have to do with regards to this is actually grind things down almost on these letters, but then insert it back into the black and use my belt sander, so I know, because I want the letters to hit all the way down flat against this black piece. So I'm going to put it back in and sand it down because I want to keep everything smooth, so that you don't see the Ultra lettering anymore. That is the idea behind it. So that's it for now. We're going to let that harden overnight and then do our sanding. Alright, so this one turned out quite a bit better. Actually better than I expected. I have just a couple little pieces inside the L and the T to just put a little dab of the epoxy putty back in, let that harden. Little bits like that it could harden within the hour, and then I'll just sand it off. But everything else is a nice smooth surface, so after a few coats of paint that should blend in pretty solid and seamless in theory. This one is going to need a little bit more work. I'm going to have to get some more of that epoxy putty and mush that in there and let that set overnight and then do a sanding so I get the same kind of result here. The idea is to get these completely solid looking, no more Ultra. We're going to be erasing that Ultra, all the Nerf. In fact, I'm going to be doing that next with the Dremel sanding tool more likely, and grinding off all of the Nerf logos, all of the caution things here, just getting rid of all the lettering so that this has a nice realistic authentic look to the prop build that we're working on. Alright, so I mushed in some more epoxy putty, just went generously with this and pressed it in. Again, used some latex gloves, and then I just went ahead and used the extra I had and mushed it in some potential spots that would show up later on. So I'm going to let that set overnight again, and then do some sanding. Now, when I did use the belt sander, I used that to get the majority of the letters off, but then as I got closer to it, I went ahead and used my hand sander. Now, if you don't have one of those, and you just have your Dremel, Dremel's fine. Just Dremel it all down as best you can, and then use the hand sander to smooth it out. And then I used, and then once I got down to it, I did some hand sanding. Oh, and then rather, you could also, if you have a hand sander, put a finer grain sandpaper on there and buff everything down. But just take it in layers, a little at a time. You can easily take some off. You can't put stuff back on. So always use that as a rule of thumb when you're sanding anything for that matter. So now I'm going to let this set, do some sanding, and then work on sanding and prepping the rest of these parts for some primer paint. Alright, so I did a little bit of sanding here. I got a little ahead of myself though, and I sanded it a little bit under. So what I'm going to need to do with this particular piece is I've got it clicked back into place. Oh, and be sure when you're mushing it in, you're going to have to drill back out these little notches. There's little holes right here that this molding fits into. You want to keep those, mush the epoxy around them, or just drill them back out. That's what I did. And then click it back in. But I got ahead of myself. I was trying to just sand it down some and then get it to click back in and then sand it down level with this. It's a little under, so I'm going to go ahead and take some more epoxy putty and just mush that into this and let that dry overnight and then give it a sanding, which I probably would have had to anyway, because you're going to see these little lines of this molding. We're trying to get this looking completely smooth. So I'm going to mush that in, let that dry overnight, and then do some sanding on top of that. So now I'm going to work on the next piece on the belt sander, and that should go a little bit quicker. Alright, so now I've gotten everything apart, and then we've gone over everything with some steel wool. So just some fine steel wool that gets in all these nooks and crannies, and then what you want to go for is the taking and making the shiny plastic dull. So then you know you've got a lot of pores in here for the paint to really bite well into. And I have this together just so I can show you guys. Right here, there was these little forks right here in the center sight. So what I did is I just took my cutting wheel on my Dremel and just zipped that off there, and then used my hand sander and sanded that down really nice and smooth. So because of course on the Wingman it's nice and straight here, it doesn't have that big giant bulky sight in the front. So I cut that down there. So here's what it looks like. Comes apart, and there's this little tab, this little piece that inserts in the middle. Alright, yes, that is my cat in the background. So here it is, it's all dulled there. So this is the layout of all the parts that you should have taken apart and sanded. Right here, again, you can notice I took off all the orange, all the Nerf, all the directions, even the texturing and the little triangle pieces. I tried to buff that down as best as I could with the hand sander, sanding it by hand with some sandpaper, and then going over it with some steel wool to really smooth things out. So that's what I've got there. Here's the handle pieces. You got your jam door, the trigger, the rev trigger, the two little tabs on the top of the Picatinny rails, and this sight piece. So those are the pieces that you're going to need to sand down and prep for painting. So, oh, also these are the Ultra pieces, and I hit it with some primer just to make sure that none of the Ultra showed through, so I could fill it in with the epoxy if I needed to, but everything turned out really well. This is the parts that I put the epoxy in the back end and sanded down to go for exactly this, a nice smooth look with no Ultra showing, because it's going to be a big part of the, I think it falls at the cylinder section, yeah. Any case, you want that all nice and smooth for this prop build. So there it is. Now what we've got to do is just add a coat of primer to the rest of these parts. Alright, so here is everything primed and ready to go. So now all we've got to do is tape off the larger areas. We're going to use, again, a photo we pulled up online of the Apex Wingman and use that as a guide for taping things and getting ready for painting. Again, when you paint, do your primer and then work with your light colors first and work up to your darker colors. So, of course, the handles are going to be hitting that with the brown and the wood grain effect, then reversing that and hitting that with the blacks. And I guess, yes, the one exception is that little piece of silver right there. But then in this case, for these larger pieces, we're going to be hitting it all with silver, a metallic dull silver, then doing our tape offs and painting our blacks. So that's what we're going to do next. Alright, so now I'm going to work on the wood grain texture to the handle here. Here is one of the finished ones I've done right here. To create that realistic wood grain look, I'm going to show you how to do that. First off, we just used a can of more of a mahogany brown tone of flat primer to coat this. So actually we painted it first with a lighter brown. It was a little too much tan. Then I went over it with this brown primer, and it had a more of a flat tone to it and a more of a mahogany look. So that's what we went with. What I've got next is some acrylic paint. I just mixed some black and some brown until I got a similar tone to this, but many shades darker, because I'm going to paint that grain. What we're going to start off doing is just a grunge wash. You've probably seen us do this before to just give a really wet, just a oil grunged, dirty look to things. Well, I'm going to apply that first and just liberally paint this whole thing up all over the place with this mixture of kind of an umber acrylic paint all over here. And I did a little touch of water just to make it more watered down, and quickly move over the area of the handle here, getting in a little bit mushed into the texturing here on the grip, underneath and around. You want to work quickly and keep things wet, so you don't want it drying just yet. And then we're just going to take a paper towel or a Kleenex or whatever and just wipe most of it off. But it's going to kind of mix in with the paint and give it an even deeper tone and more texture to it. This is a nice base to start off for our grain effects. Just leaving a little bit left over here. It just tends to weather and stain the brown a lot more. Alright, that's probably good. I might add a little more up in here. Just kind of creates this umber marbled look to it here. Then we're going to do what's called a dry brushing technique, and I'm going to take a little bit of just more paint, a little less watered down. I'm going to just put a little dab here on my paper, and then I got some of my umber and a little more watered down. I'm going to put some drops of that in here and just mix it in, because I wanted it just a pinch darker and a little thicker for this effect to do the dry brushing. That looks pretty good right there. I'm going to just use that as the base. Then I'm going to take this dry brush, the frizzier the better, so you can use these fibers to create, and I'm just going to dab a little bit in here and just kind of practice on the paper. That's pretty good, just a little dab of that paint, and then I'm just going to start just lightly touching and streaking, putting streaks of grain on this wood. And you can go back over what you've done and just gradually, that might be a little thick, but that doesn't matter for the time being. I'm going to show you what we're going to do next. Just kind of squiggle and add a whole bunch of lines. Don't worry about being a perfectionist on this. And as you start and then just sweep through all your strokes, and then that's going to pick up some of the paint and create some thinner lines of graining. And then just take your Kleenex or paper towel and just kind of sweep down on what you've painted. And it lightens up those strokes, but it keeps it in there so it looks like wood grain. And then just keep doing that, just a little dab to wet the tips of that dry brush, and then sweeping it through the grip here underneath. Be sure and get some underneath too to make it more convincing underneath the finger guard there, the trigger guard. And across here, and take time to go back in and do some quick wiping down before things dry too much. It's okay if it starts to dry some, because then that really starts to set into the paint there, and you really start getting that nice convincing wood grain texture to the grip. Sweeping through, and again, always keep it in one direction for that wood grain. Thumb is over here on the bottom of the guard. I want to sweep some grain up through there also, and then take that paper towel and just lightly, you don't want to rub it off, don't press firm, just lightly sweep through, because this is basically almost kind of serving as another paintbrush really, and driving that lightly dusted dry brushed graining into the grip. Whoops. So there it is, everybody, to create pretty much a very convincing wood grain on anything you're working on, for that matter. Just get your base brown that you want, do a quick wash over it to stain it and darken it a little bit more, and then go with a dry brushing technique in a slightly darker color of the brown in acrylic, and then later on I'm going to take a satin or flat, I haven't decided yet, clear coat spray paint to just seal everything in. Alright, so here is everything painted and ready for the black now. You again went over it with the primer, and then went with the dull metallic silver, and then we did the tape off and that whole wood grain texture effect. Now with this one, I think we're just going to go with the black that's already there. So all we've got to do now is just tape off and newspaper this section and hit this with some dull silver, and that is done for the handles. For the side pieces, those are just going to be staying the raw silver, as that's a main part of the silver area of the barrel. Those turned out great. In fact, some of the little pitted areas we had with the epoxy look really cool and authentic there for that scraped kind of gouged metal on the sides. And the trigger and the rev in that dull gold. We just taped off the areas that didn't need the paint inside there. It's best to do that so things aren't gunked up in the internals and the mechanism. So those are those, and I'm going to get those out of the way. And here's really what you're going to really want to know. The jam door, this is the way it should be taped, because it's going to be going in like so. Once it's got that pin back in, and you've got that pyramid piece, that's going to be black. So you're going to want to tape that door off like that. The barrel piece needs to be taped off like this. Here's the back end, so that's what's exposed, so that's going to get all black. The back of the cylinder, covered that stays silver. And the top part here That part, the Picatinny down here, that's all black. And likewise on the flip side of things, there's that pyramid here. You can really see it well there without the jam door. And cover that up because that stays silver. And then this part here is black, black, and black. And this side of the barrel, again, oh, I should flip wrong side actually. So this is what's going to be going together with the barrel. So you can see how that part exposed on this barrel, that needs to be black. So now you kind of see how that lays. We've taped everything off, so this is going to be black and that's going to be black, the rest silver. Likewise on the flip side of the barrel. Make sure you cover up in front here. Now on the other side I did hit the front end of the barrel right here with some black. I hit the primer. I put some primer inside and then some black so that orange doesn't show through when everything's together. I'm trying to get this as authentic looking as possible. So you'll want to do that too, is just hit the inside of that barrel with some primer and some black so that doesn't show up. So now we've just got to take these outside and put on the flat black.
Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put some toothpaste mixture here. I mixed a little bit of toothpaste and a little bit of water to kind of thin it out, kind of like acrylic paint. And I'm going to use my finger to rub it onto the areas here to create an oxidation effect. And when you guys keep in mind, when you put this on an area, when you rub it off afterwards, it's going to peel off a little bit more than what you put on. So go sparingly on this at first, because it'll definitely rub off more than you think it will. Alright, and I pulled up a reference photo to kind of oxidize, make the oxidized look on this here. So, alright.
Alright, so here it is with all of the toothpaste wiped off. So we have all that chipped paint on there, but of course we're not going for the severe chipped paint look, but similar to what we did in the Chewbacca bowcaster. If you haven't seen that, just click the card here and check that out. The kind of an oxidized weathering of the powder coat rather than a chipping. So what I'm going to do now is take this back out and go over it with some high gloss black, just a really quick coat to darken this really light silver contrast you see and get more of a duller look. So it's going to look black all over, but you're going to see this faint lighter coloring of black in these areas. So I'm going to take that out and do that next. We created our own custom decals using an open source vector software called Inkscape. We'll leave a link in the description below where you can download that for yourself. But you don't have to take that route. You can also use some adhesive decals, lettering and numbering from your local craft store. For the wolf insignia, you can use some adhesive vinyl from your local craft store or some black electrical tape. We took this route and designed our own custom SVG vector file so that we could upload it into our Cricut plotter cutter software. And then position everything that we wanted it to be for our black vinyl on our sticky back paneling that we use for the cutter, uploading it into the machine itself, firing up the plotter cutter, and creating our own custom decals. Alright, so one of the other parts we almost forgot to do is this back cylinder piece that actually most of it goes inside, but this part is exposed in the back and that needs to be black. As well as this is the metal pin, it goes inside. There's a little spring that goes right here inside this hole here. So we taped this part. We're trying to keep all the internal mechanisms unpainted just because that could potentially gum things up. So we're just doing just the essential parts that are showing and painting those black. But first I gotta hit this and this piece with some primer. I've got it cleaned off with alcohol, sanded down, rubbed down, and then we're going to hit it with some primer and then some flat black, and I think that should do it for all of the overall painting. Alright, so here it is nearly finished. Here are the decals we put on. I happen to have, there's the gold vinyl that I cut for that button and that caution symbol. And the caution symbol, what I did is just simply draw a little line of sharp black Sharpie marker underneath and then overlay that on top so the exclamation point shows up. And then a little bit about the, there's that, what I want to call the wolf symbol there. You can see that in the door, and better representation of it without the jam doors right here. We had carbon fiber. You can just go to your local craft store and use a solid black vinyl. That's fine also. But I had some scrap from my workplace that was carbon fiber. It actually turned out really cool. You can actually see the offset of it right there, especially when it's overlaid on the black. Now, how I did this, it was a little bit of a pain to weed out every one of those little numbers and letters, but it is possible. And I didn't have any transfer paper, so what I did, what you can do, and here's what it looks like. This is the backing, and I weeded out all the extra stuff around it, leaving just the letters. I took some Scotch tape, and I stuck it on my hand and just let the oils of my hand kind of take some of the adhesion away from it a little bit. Then I put the piece on top and used the back of my fingernail just to kind of rub it in to adhere to the tape more so than the backing. And then just gently peeled it away and let it separate from the backing and just stick to the Scotch tape. Then I put it over the piece and then use the back of my fingernail again to rub it on, and as soon as that vinyl, that adhesive vinyl hits the rougher areas of the paint, it really tacks on. But just to make sure, I rubbed it all the way through with the back of my fingernail and then lightly peeled away the tape, and it adhered there and worked perfectly. So I have the large version there, small one there. The letters and numbers would have been so insanely small that I just represented it with a darker line there. So that's how I did the lettering, and I also taped off an area here, a little square, hit it with some white primer and then some bright red for that safety switch. And lastly, I did the primer in the black, and then I just, of course, because it's such a pain to really get on all the black, I didn't want to oversaturate it with paint, so it looked really cool and gave it a nice burn effect inside here. A nice patinaed look there, but what I am going to do in some of these lighter spots in between is what we're basically going to do next is the grunge weathering, that oil grunge look. And I'm going to mix in a little bit of black and brown acrylic paint, water it down and brush it over the whole thing, and then before everything dries, take a paper towel and wipe it down, but leave it in all the crevices and nooks and crannies and spots here to give it that really worn, realistic, grunged, weathered look. And I'm going to leave it extra heavy in those lighter spots in that cylinder to darken things up. Then after all that, then I can go over this all, as you can notice, doing that black to fill in some of those weathered areas. It was a gloss black. I don't necessarily want it gloss, but I'm going to hit the whole thing in a matte clear, and that is going to dull everything up and give it an even more realistic look. So it's time to do the grunge weathering. Alright, so we're going to do the weathering, the grunging. I've got some acrylic mixed in here just to kind of get almost like a mechanic grease coloring, a brownish black grease color. That's what I'm going for to wipe. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to water this a little bit down. Right now, I'm just use a Q-tip, but I might use this Q-tip while it's just solid paint. And maybe not the Q-tip so much. I'm going to set that over here. Use a brush, and I'm going to get some of that in there and get into these little spots right here and gunk that up, because after this is done I'm going to use again that flat clear to seal everything in. So I'm going to go ahead and just load this brush with just some direct paint. My dog in the background, sound effects here. I'm just going to just dab some in here. Got my poodle adding sound effects for this video. And I'm just gonna, I'm gonna just leave in there to harden and darken up those spaces I couldn't get very well with the spray paint. So I'm just gonna go around through here and fill in those spots. Sorry guys, I went off camera here because I'm focusing on what I'm doing. Just going around those with this brush, and then I'm just going to leave that on like it is actually. Maybe just kind of dust on some more over the black that I've sprayed to kind of blend it in. Just give it this greased, grunged oiled look to it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of water to the remainder of my paint to thin it out a bit, and then I'm just going to be brushing and washing over this whole thing and then wiping it down with a paper towel. Pretty much wiping most of it off, but leaving behind any recesses and little pitted areas there where it would build up dust and dirt and grease that you find on a real blaster. This really looks the part. I just want to make sure I get, because this was solid orange, I want to make sure I get all the orange out of this. I just don't want any of that orange to show. So I'm going to keep going back and forth and make sure I got all a good coverage, and then we're going to go start doing the wash on the rest of the blaster. Alright, the moment we've been all waiting for here to do the grunge weathering. So I've got it watered down here quite a bit. Kind of the consistency of very watered down mud, milk, whatever you want to call it. But it drips with effort from the, that's about how water, just a little dab of water. And I'm just going to go through all this and just start painting over it, and then use a paper towel to wipe most of the excess off and leave a very convincing grunge weathered look. Alright, so here is the end result after the clear coat. It turned out great. So now all we have to do, oh, here, and by the way, is the cylinder. So that's the part that's going to be exposed. So that turned out awesome as well. Now I've got all of this put back together, the cylinder, I got the rev switch, the two tabs on the top of the Picatinny. Now it's just time to flip this piece, and put all the insides back in. Alright, so I've decided to do this in real time rather than a high-speed montage, because it's going to be, there's a couple technical pieces. First off is this little gear piece. Now what we're going to need to do, get myself untangled here, is that little spring right here, and there's the screw. Well, what's going to have to happen is right there in that little circular spot, we have to line everything up. This little screw goes around that post, and this little pin goes right into that little notch there. So we're gonna make sure we set the wire into that notch, and then everything else rotates up here. And I'm gonna have to try and then jockey the screw right over the post. There we go. Rotate this over likewise. Everything should set in. Again, you're gonna need two hands, so that's where that's gonna be. And while that's held in place, take that washer screw and set that post so it doesn't go anywhere. Use my larger screwdriver here. Yep, don't over torque it, just a little bit. Works out fine, and now we've got it back in that track and that screw in place. So that takes care of that piece. Alright, the next piece is this. We're going to need to put this one on with another little washer screw. This goes over these two posts here. And the washer screw, I'm going to set that on my screwdriver. Fit this through the spring. It's going to be a little tricky. You know what? Heck, let's do this. Let's fit the spring over the post first. And kind of set that in place. That's pretty good. Yeah, there's a little notch you can kind of set around right there. And then put the washer screw in. Tighten that down. Again, don't over torque, you'll crack that plastic. Just a little nudge is plenty. And now we have this portion. Alright, and the next piece is the cylinder assembly. Again, this piece is facing out. I'm going to go ahead and take this plate, and that fits right here in that space, like so. There's a little, you can see that little track right there. Well, that plate drops in place right there, and that fits in here. And then here's that post I had to paint. I'm putting that spring back on. Let me actually pull this whole assembly out for a moment. And then this drops back in, side there, So I have that spring action. That is going to set, plate's going to set right here, and this spring piece is going to set right there. So that's the cylinder portion. Next, I'm going to do the rev switch. So I'm going to put that, whoa, come back here, you. This extra strength, little tiny spring onto the post. Be extra careful here. There we go. There, I heard that little click. So we're going to go ahead and lay that in place. Sorry. You know where I'm going with this. Yep, that's what we're going for right there. And there's that switch, the click that we want. I go ahead and slide the trigger in place to engage. Yep, that works good. Make sure I get it clicked back in and lined up. Alright, so it looks like we've got that. And before I forget, these are easily forgotten. And put that little tab on the upper rail. The other one down below on the lower rail. Right there. So there's the switch, the trigger, the rev switch. And I've got those tabs. Now all I need to do is get the screws back in. Actually, a very important part that we need is the flywheel. Now we've got that little piece here. This is going to be a little difficult as I need this little piece to fit right inside this. So I'm going to need to lift this piece out again and make sure I have that in the track here, and then realign everything up, because that's that little stopper, the dart stopper for the flywheel. So this is gonna be a little. I'm gonna need to run my line, make sure I get my lines back in here. First off, let me do this. I'm going to slide this back out. And make sure I have all my wires laid in as I would like them to be, because I got them right into that finger guard right here, my negative lines. And I need this to be laying nice and flat in this wire way. That is not obstructed. Okay. I got my lines back in here. It's looking pretty good, because I want this to lay flush when I'm done. And one other thing, I got ahead of myself. I need to take that off, because these wires are going to need to run through the finger guard underneath that gear piece. So let me push that all the way back in the back here, so that is not in the way. And then of course I'm going to solder that back here. Then I'll put that one over top. Need to push that one into the background, and that is going to be soldering right here, because I made my marks with my Sharpie here and here. I know which ones I've got to put it back onto. Use a little fingernail power here to squish things back in. Get them set right. Okay, that's looking pretty good there. Everything's out of the way of the gear there. Pressure here. Use the edge of my screwdriver just to kind of work things in a bit more. Ah, there we go. Yep, there was that little slot, and I wanted to get that pressed back really you got to make sure that it hits in this little opening right back in here, so it drops into the handle and out of the way of this gear piece. That's what we want. And I think, yep, I gotta push this up a little bit more. Because I did grind out a little area, a wireway back in here. I remember with my Dremel. So real quick, I'm gonna get this out of the way. Make sure that this is down in there like it should be. There we go. Make sure that is way back in there. This likewise. Is back in there. And around. Alright, so to spare you guys the entire painful viewing of me jamming these wires in, there's a longer wire, shorter wire. I ran the longer wire deeper into that wireway I had cut and then laid the shorter wire over the top of it, and that makes plenty of room for this action to happen. Here, I'm going to get my arm out of the way, and you can see that it's not going to get caught up with the wire. So that's what I want, getting that in place. And now I've got my flywheel pretty much set here. Then I'm going to take this plate and fit this little bracket over the top of that little plate over here. Correction, flip it. So I just got to basically line it up and make sure, okay. So there it is, there's that little, so again it's going in this way. That's the little gear piece. There's the little slot there. And then it goes back into that track. Then I can get my cylinder back in over the post, push this little rod back in, and it sets in nicely. So now we've got this little stopper in place as it needs to be here. There we go. I pushed up on that a little bit. That little stopper, let me lift it up so you guys can see that little yellow stopper there. Pushed up a little bit, and then that let everything fall into place as it needs to be and align itself. So now I can go ahead and screw this flywheel in place. There it is again, guys, the assembly, and then dropping that. I'm going to put this trigger back in lastly. I'm going to go ahead and solder these wires back in place, and then drop the trigger back in like so, and then get this screwed back down, and then the clamshell on, and I think we're pretty much set. Alright, so I've got everything soldered back in place. I've got that one on the top and the one in the middle done, ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and set the trigger back on. We are all set. Now I can put the top shell on, and this should be ready to pop the battery in and shoot some darts. And if you haven't seen our video on the internal mods of this to give it way better firepower, just click the card here and check that out. Alright, now to just get these screws back in and we're ready to go. One other thing to keep in mind is there are two longer screws. That goes in the largest portion of the blaster, which is up here and here. Alright everybody, hope you enjoyed watching the tutorial on how you can convert your Nerf Ultra 2 into the Apex Legends Wingman. If you haven't subscribed to our channel already, just click the double D icon below. You'll help us create more cool content for your enjoyment and inspiration.
Also check out a couple of our other videos.
Until next time, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Chandler. And this is Damaged Darts.